Have you ever wanted to slam the door shut, kill the signal, and disappear for a while? Not to hurt anybody, not to start a scene, not because you need drama, because you are tired of being seen before you are ready, tired of every half-built plan getting watched, tired of every slip turning into a public event, tired of dragging your own recovery through a room full of people who are still asking questions while the wound is open. That urge is not just weakness wearing a clever mask. A lot of the time, it is your mind trying to protect itself from overload. In this video, I want to unpack the psychology of going quiet, why public promises can drain your momentum, and why disappearing for a season can be the cleanest way to rebuild. But first, let me take you straight to the moment where most people trip themselves for no good reason. Because it usually starts with something that looks innocent, and that is the trap. It is late. You are finally alone. The day has chewed you up, but for one weird little hour, your head lights up. Tomorrow, you tell yourself, things change. You are going to train, or write, or apply for jobs, or finally start the thing you have been dodging for months. The plan feels sharp, clean, almost holy. For a few minutes, you can actually see the version of you that is disciplined, focused, and hard to knock off course. And then you make the move that poisons the chemistry. You tell somebody, maybe a friend, maybe your brother, maybe you toss a little hint online, just enough for people to notice. You do it because it feels good to make the moment real. You want witnesses. You want the thing to feel official. And the response is usually warm. They say it sounds great. They say they believe in you. They say they cannot wait to see it happen. For a second, that approval feels better than the plan itself. That is where the trouble starts. Because after that little hit of relief, the brain often behaves like part of the job is already finished. The intention got pushed outside your head. Social pressure got converted into a feeling of progress. You walk away with emotional credit for work you have not done yet. And that matters more than people want to admit. Because if you can be made to feel successful before the work begins, you have already handed over a piece of the engine. And you are going to need that engine next. There is a long line of research in psychology around what happens when goals are spoken out loud. The second a plan becomes social, it is no longer just private intention. It becomes part of your identity in front of other people. Sounds harmless. It is not. Not once you understand what the mind does with that. The human brain is not some perfect accountant sitting there with a neat ledger saying, "Relax, nothing has been earned yet." It is much more primitive than that. If a plan gets attention, praise, or recognition, the reward system can start reacting as if movement has already happened. Not because you are dumb, because you are human. You get a taste of status, a taste of momentum, a taste of being seen as the kind of person who is about to become better. And that taste can blur the line between intention and execution. That is why some people feel weirdly flat after announcing a goal. They thought sharing it would make them accountable. Instead, it made them feel partially finished. Nobody really warns you about that part. You do not only lose privacy when you announce a goal, you also risk leaking the energy that was supposed to power the next few months. You spend some of the reward before you earn the result. Bad trade. It is like celebrating the finish line during the first mile of a marathon. So if silence feels uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is the price of keeping your internal fuel where it belongs. And once that clicks, the next part gets ugly in a very familiar way. Because the problem is not only what happens before you start, it is what happens when everybody watches you fail to keep going. There is a different kind of pain that shows up when a plan dies in public. It is not just disappointment. It is the feeling that your unfinished self is now sitting in plain view of everyone who knows your name. You said you were going to change, and then you did not. You said you were ready, and then you froze. You said you were starting over, and now people are checking in. That is a brutal place to live in. Because now every message, every nod, every "so how is that going?" becomes a tiny reminder that the story is not matching the script. People usually mean well. They think encouragement will help. They think checking in keeps you honest. They think asking is support. But your nervous system often hears something else. It hears observation. It hears measurement. It hears pressure. And pressure changes behavior. Once you feel watched, your attention splits between the work and the performance of looking okay. That split is expensive. It burns focus. It makes you self-conscious. It adds social anxiety on top of the actual task. That is why public rebuilding can feel so heavy. You are not just trying to improve. You are trying to improve while carrying the eyes of everybody who remembers what you used to be. And when shame walks in, the whole room changes. Because shame does not just tell you that you made a mistake. It tells you the mistake is now part of your identity. That is where a lot of people stop moving. And if you have ever wanted to disappear after a public failure, the next part will sound uncomfortably familiar. Because the urge is usually not random at all. It is your system trying to get out of the spotlight. A lot of people misread the impulse to pull back. They call it avoidance. They call it immaturity. They call it quitting. But from a psychological angle, the urge to retreat often shows up when the body is flooded with social threat. Not physical threat, social threat. The kind that hits when you feel exposed, judged, or reduced to the worst moment of your life. In those moments, the nervous system does not care about your branding. It cares about safety. It wants fewer eyes, fewer questions, fewer reminders, fewer chances to perform while broken. That is why the urge to go offline can hit so hard after a collapse. The mind is looking for a low stimulation space where it can stop defending itself long enough to recover. You are not trying to be mysterious. You are trying to breathe. In nature, injured animals do not go looking for an audience. They look for cover. They hide until the threat passes, and the body can start fixing itself. People are not that different. When your confidence has been shredded, when your routines have fallen apart, when you are embarrassed by how far you dropped, disappearing can feel less like escape and more like triage. But there is a myth about this that people love online, and it is a bad one because it sells the fantasy of reinvention without the pain that makes reinvention real. And that fantasy is the next thing that needs to die. Scroll long enough and you will see the polished version of withdrawal. Perfectly lit mornings, black coffee on a clean desk, a camera angle that makes discipline look cinematic, a notebook, a run, a few tasteful books, maybe a moody gym clip with no context. Looks like transformation with a filter on it. People call it focus season. They call it monk mode. They call it locking in. Cute branding, convenient branding, and a little fake if we are being honest. Because it suggests the hardest part of rebuilding is the aesthetic. It is not. The first days of going quiet can feel powerful. You cut off the noise, and for a while, your brain gets a hit of control. That part is real. The room feels cleaner. Your choices feel sharper. You might even feel proud of finally taking yourself seriously. Then the middle shows up, and the middle is where the romance dies. You are no longer excited by your own decision, but you have not yet become the person who benefits from it. The first rush is gone. The silence gets heavy. Your routines stop feeling like identity and start feeling like repetition. That is the part that hits people in the face. Because this is not the part the internet edits in. This is the part where you sit in a dark room wondering if you made a mistake. This is the part where the phone stays quiet. This is the part where your old life is not taking you back, but your new one has not fully arrived either. You lose the social texture that used to keep you numb. Weekend invites slow down. Group chats cool off. Some people do not like the version of you with fewer excuses and fewer jokes. Others simply cannot follow someone who has stopped playing the same habits. And then you notice something uncomfortable. A lot of the attention around you was not love. It was proximity, habit, convenience, shared noise. That realization stings, but it also opens the door to something harder and more useful. Because once the false noise drops away, the old identity starts to crack. And that is where the real surgery begins. There's a phase in deep change that almost nobody describes properly. It is not a montage. It is not inspiring. It is not pretty. It feels like a breakdown. You start seeing how many of your habits were held together by image management, how much of your personality was built around avoiding embarrassment, how much of your behavior depended on being able to explain yourself quickly before anyone looked too closely. When that structure disappears, the old self starts fighting back. It will drag up every awkward memory it can find, every rejection, everything you should have said better, every time you looked weak, every time you promised too much. The mind does that because it wants continuity. It would rather keep a familiar identity, even a failing one, than walk through the uncertainty of becoming someone new. That fight can get nasty. You may feel lonely in a way that seems too big for what is happening. You may feel flat. You may feel scared for no clear reason. You may even feel like you are losing your grip, when what is really happening is that your old organizing pattern is being torn down. That is why the process can feel like grief, because it is grief. You are not only losing habits, you are losing the image of who you thought you would be by now. You are losing the future that was built around the old version of you. That kind of loss has to be mourned. If you do not mourn it, you will keep reaching back for it. And if you keep reaching back for it, you will never get deep enough into the dark to build anything that lasts. That leads into the next part, because most people make one fatal move here. They try to clean up their pain too early. The default advice after a collapse is always the same. Be kind to yourself. Release the shame. Let it go. Talk it out. Move on. Sometimes that is solid advice. Sometimes it is exactly what you need. But there is a specific kind of failure where rushing to soften the pain works against the change you actually need. Because some emotions are not there to be dissolved right away. They are there to tell you how big the damage was. Humiliation, regret, self-disgust, the sting of being underestimated, the shame of watching your own standards fall apart. Terrible feelings, truly, nobody is pretending otherwise, but they are also powerful. They tell the body and brain that something has to be different this time. The mind becomes more plastic under intense stress. Not because stress is good, but because high emotional load can force attention, memory, and behavior into a narrower, more serious channel. The system starts paying attention. It starts building stronger associations. That is why some people only change after a real collapse. Comfort rarely breaks a pattern. Consequences do. The mistake is not feeling the pain. The mistake is handing it away too early. The second you outsource your discomfort into endless explanations, you dilute the pressure that could have turned into action. That is why venting can get dangerous when it becomes a substitute for rebuilding. You talk, you feel lighter, people sympathize, you leave the conversation relieved, and then nothing changes. The pain escaped, but the pattern stayed. So the question becomes, how do you keep the pressure without letting it poison you? That is where the real tactic comes in. The goal is not to hate yourself. That is useless. The goal is to stop treating pain like trash to dump and start treating it like energy that has to be contained. Think about it like this. If anger leaks everywhere, it turns into chaos. If shame leaks everywhere, it turns into self-pity. If regret leaks everywhere, it turns into noise. But if those emotions are held inside a disciplined structure, they become force. That is the part most people miss. You do not need a public audience for your recovery. You need a private container strong enough to hold the heat. When the morning feels impossible, when the task looks ridiculously small, when the room is quiet and your mind starts bargaining with you, you do not go hunting for comfort. You go hunting for fuel. You remember the appointment you missed, the promise you broke, the way you looked when things collapsed, the tone people used when they stopped taking you seriously. Not to torture yourself, to remind yourself what the alternative costs. Pain becomes useful when it stops being a story and starts becoming a standard. That is how people get through the empty hours of a rebuild. Not by feeling inspired every day, not by waiting for confidence. They keep the pressure sealed, and they let discipline do the translating. Pain says, never again. Discipline says, prove it. That translation matters because it leads straight into the actual operating system of the silent rebuild. And once that system is in place, the next 6 months can change everything. If you want a real reset, you need enough time for the new habits to stop feeling borrowed. Short bursts do not change identity. Moods do not change identity. A good week does not change identity. What changes identity is repetition under low visibility. I think of it as a blackout period. Not because you become fake, not because you become cold, because you stop feeding the world updates it does not need. There are 3 rules. Rule 1, do not dramatize your exit. A lot of people love announcing that they are stepping back. They write the paragraph, they post the reflective caption, they explain that they need time to focus. That is just another way of wanting to be seen. If you are serious, you do not perform the departure, you just reduce your footprint. Less posting, less explaining, less broadcasting, less emotional leakage. You can still be polite, you can still show up where life requires it, but you stop making your inner process public property. Rule 2, starve people of details. Most questions about your life are not really care. A good chunk of them are quiet comparison checks. People want to know where you stand. They want a data point. They want to measure you against their own insecurity. Do not feed that machine. When someone asks what you are up to, answer like somebody with no appetite for performance. Keeping my head down. Taking care of work. One step at a time. Short. Calm. Boring. Do not describe the plan. Do not reveal the target. Do not narrate the transformation. The less material you give people, the less they can turn you into a story. Rule 3, stay consistent without applause. This is the part that filters everybody. There will be no cheer when you show up at dawn, no applause when you hit the gym exhausted, no praise when you open the document again and keep going. The work has to get done without immediate reward. Sounds harsh until you see what it buys you. It buys you privacy. It buys you autonomy. It buys you a mind that is no longer adjusting itself around the opinions in the room. A few months of that, done honestly, can change the texture of a life. Not because the world notices, because you do. And once you have lived through enough quiet repetition, something strange happens right at the edge of the dark. You stop wanting the old kind of revenge. Most people think the reason they want to disappear is to come back stronger and prove everyone wrong. That is part of it. At the beginning, the fantasy is usually petty in the most human way. You want the people who doubted you to regret it. You want the ones who laughed to feel stupid. You want the ones who left to see what they missed. That motive is common. It gets you moving, but it is not the final reason the process works. Because after months of living without an audience, something in your nervous system shifts. You stop measuring your worth through the reactions of people who were never inside the work with you. The applause you were chasing starts to sound thin. The old need to explain yourself gets quieter. The idea of being admired by strangers feels less urgent than being solid in your own skin. That is the real payoff. Not revenge, not applause, not a dramatic reveal. Independence. When you come back after a real blackout season, you do not need to announce it. You do not need a speech. You do not need to post the summary of your transformation and wait for the room to react. Your habits will speak first. Your posture will speak first. Your calm will speak first. Your ability to hold your ground will say more than any caption ever could. And here is the weird final twist. The people you once hoped would be shocked may not matter much anymore. That is not coldness. That is release. You are no longer chasing approval that hurt you in the first place. You are no longer trapped in the social loop that made your growth depend on being noticed. You are out. The old self was built on exposure. The new one is built on command. That is why silence is so powerful when you use it right. It is not empty absence. It is a controlled environment where identity can be rebuilt without interference. And once that rebuild is complete, you do not return as the same person who left. You come back with a different center of gravity. If this hits, keep the work private until it is real. That is the point. Do not drain the engine by talking too early. Do not trade momentum for quick reassurance. Let the rebuild stay yours until it has enough weight to stand on its own. If you want to mark this moment, leave a single hourglass in the comments. No explanation, no goals, no speech, just the symbol. And if you want more videos like this, subscribe so you have a place to come back to when the noise gets too loud and you need a hard reminder to stay locked in. Now close the app, put the phone down, and get back to the work nobody can see yet.